Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. My name is Dalia, and I work as a community manager at Kong. I'm very happy to have all of you join us for the last user call for 2022. Very happy to have all of you here today. Today, the topic will be discover the new Kong plugins in Kong Gateway 3.1. And we have Gang who will be presenting. We have also Hans and Sami who will be doing some demos for you. And please put all of your questions in the Q&A function on the bottom. We will answer them at the end of the presentation. And yeah, with that, I will give it to Gang to introduce himself and to get going with the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Dalia. Good morning, good afternoon. This is Gango from London. So today I'm happy to present to you the new features we delivered in Kong 3.1. Yeah. The agenda is fairly simple. I will give everybody an introduction about Kong Gateway and also Kong Gateway plugins. Then we get into the details of new plugins being released in version 3.1. After that, we will have two of our engineers join me today to do some live demos of 3 new plugins. At the end, we have a short moment for Q&A. If we can't address them, we will address them offline anyway. By the way, this session is recorded, so you will get a recording after the session. Yeah. So very recently, Kong is being named as a leader by Gartner the 3rd time. And we moved even further on the right-hand side. So that literally means our product offerings is much more advanced than any other vendors. Because you can see on the chart, you know, on the further you're on the right-hand side, literally means you're more advanced. Obviously, we are newcomers, so we're not as good as, you know, the old mature vendors like RPG or MuleSoft, because they have been there for probably more than 10 years now. But we are the fastest ones getting the leader quadrant, and we are the leaders 3 years in a row already. So you're always the most popular API gateway in the planet already. The next thing I'm going to highlight is we have a Kong plugin hub. I put the links on the top here. If you haven't been visited this site, I suggest you do. Now, with this new plugin being released in version 3.1, this plugin hub actually has about more than 100 plugins provided here, not only by Kong, but also by Kong partners, and also lots of Kong lovers like you. They actually contributed also open source plugins for the community as well. Have a look, and you will find something probably helpful for your work. Next one is I'm going to mention is plugin compatibilities. As all you know, Kong Gateway can be deployed in different modes. And normally you can do DB lays, you know, if you open source, probably this is an easy way to do it. You don't need a database, you just have a configuration files and load your Kong. The downside obviously is you can't really change your configurations on the fly, and it will be fixed as you start Kong. The good thing obviously is, you know, you can scale it easily, and it's very tiny footprint for to run. So I can still see lots of people running DBLS today. Then the classic ones, which is every single Kong Gateway instance have a database behind it. The good thing is everybody can change the configurations and read the latest configurations out. The bad thing is the database has to be connected all the time by all the instances. Then the third mode is hybrid. Obviously, you have a CP only being connected to the database, and DP nodes are talking to the CP. The the good thing about this is you can still benefit from dynamically change your configurations of Kong Gateway and also apply plugins on the fly. As well as you don't really need to have the DP nodes connected to a database, especially true when your DP nodes is actually running in the DMZ. So with this 3 deployment mode in mind, our Kong Gateway plugins obviously has a compatibilities to each of this deployment mode. So if you apply a plugin and if it does not work as expected, then I recommend you check this compatibility list. It might be because your deploy mode is not supported by that particular plugin. So that probably will reduce 50% of the chance of, you spend lots of time figuring out why it does not work. Actually, it's fundamentally not supported by this deployment mode. So the link I put down already there below, have a look. So why I highlight this too is because this is fundamental for the plugins. So before you can enjoy any plugins or any new plugins, this basic knowledge hopefully will serve you for a long way. Then we will have a quick poll from Dalia.
Yes, let me raise it. See the first one. Let's see, I just launched the poll. Do you use Kong open source, enterprise, or both? Just curious to see. That will help us obviously determine the topics for future user calls, and what are you most interested in.
Looks like we have more enterprise customers.
Nice. I'm happy to see that there is also from both open source, because for the user calls, we try to cover both topics. We have a lot of topics which are only for the open source. Today we do enterprise, so we will make sure we rotate them. Cool. I will leave this open so people can vote. And shall we do the other one as well?
Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
All right. Just a sec. All right. So here's the other one. What is your deployment model? So let me launch it. That will also be helpful for us to see. Awesome. Traditional, hybrid.
Yeah, it looks fairly distributed.
Yeah, it's great. Awesome. Everyone has answered. Let's carry on with the presentation. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Kong plugins. Oh gosh. So obviously, why we provide Kong plugins is because although Kong Gateway is really lightweight and can be deployed anywhere inside of Dockers, inside Kubernetes, in the cloud, on premise, we would like to get it even more powerful. So Kong plugin is the way we actually modeled our Kong plugin, Kong gateways, to be able to make it extendable, get it more powerful and flexible. So the key is to give user the power and make them to conquer their daily problems or issues with the least of effort. All the plugins, we're trying to build them easy to use, obviously. So all the plugins we currently bundled with Kong, you can actually use it using Kong Manager UIs or use API calls to apply them or change them. You can also do the deck dump or deck sync to declaratively apply the plugins. And in the past, Connect is a little bit lag behind to support the latest release plugins. Nowadays, we more or less get a similar time from Connect to support the newly released enterprise plugins officially. The other thing is, it gives user the flexibility and power. You probably already realize you have rate limiting, transformations, observability-related plugins like log, metrics, and tracing. We also can dynamically change the plugin execution orders since version 3, and we provided open source OpenTelemetry support and WebSocket support. On the security side, we already have authentication authorization and also security management capabilities. We have a very powerful OIDC plugins, which can support probably more than 20 or 30 IDPs. And we have very rich plugin ecosystem. If you go to the plugin hub, you probably can feel that already. I have listed the new plugins we have added in version 3.1, which give our users even more power. All these green ones that is here are new plugins. SAML 2 is a new way to authenticate in Kong Gateway. Obviously, SAML 2 probably existed for quite a long time. In the old days, if anybody here did a self-based web services, you probably know SAML 2 for quite a long time. And at the beginning, because Kong Gateway is relatively new, so we go with the OAuth and OIDC as a mainstream. But when we grow our customer bases, especially the big corporation customers, they still would like us to support those mature standards like SAML 2. So as required, we provided SAML 2 support in this release. And also the XML Threat Protection is similar. Although sub-services is there for quite a long time, but you will be surprised, there are still lots of XML-based web services. So to protect our customers, we also added XML Threat Protection plugin. Other than the traditional ones, we also have added a OAS validation plugin, which is very new. And because nowadays, majority of the APIs are RESTful based. So you will send in JSON and JSON request and JSON response. This OS validation plugin can do is to, based on your OpenAPI specifications, to do the request and response validation against it. This will be able to not only validate your format and any format errors or request structure problem, but also can reduce the harmful attack against your APIs. Then we have this JWE Decryption plugin. You probably already know we have JWE validations, JWE spanner, and now we add this JWE Decryption is because we have lots of open banking financial customers. They are asked to do is to validate against a encrypted JWE token, which their partner send in. Obviously, we can't really do validations against the encrypted tokens. So the first thing we would like to do is to do a decryption. So this plugin does exactly that. So we will decrypt an encrypted token, and after that, we can send it to a JWE validation plugin to do the normal validations. Last but not least, we have another new plugin being added to support AppDynamics. If you are a bank or insurer or big government or big corporations, AppDynamics probably is the application performance management systems you're using. With this plugin, we could send transactions to AppDynamics. As part of the API going through, you will be able to see entire API journeys end-to-end in the AppDynamics controller from one single place. We also enhanced an existing mocking plugin, which I marked brown here. mocking plugin was provided probably last year, but it was fairly basic. And this time we added more features to make sure we can support much more status code samples being returned. And also you can define randomizedly which status code you would like to get returned. It would be much more useful than existing mocking. So that's the enhancement, obviously. Now let me dive into each plugins we provided. Yeah. Yeah. The first one is AppDynamics plugin. So you can see on the left-hand side, we have a client, API client. It could be a web client or mobile client. They will do is a click link or click a button, in your mobile apps or web apps. Then an API call being made through API gateway of Kong. And then Kong will proxy the API request to a backend microservices or APIs implemented. And the AppD agent being normally installed on the web front end and also on the backend microservices, which can send the API transactions informations to the AppDynamics. Before Kong API, before Kong AppD plugins, Kong Gateway is more like a black box. And with this plugin now in place, customer can actually see it from end to end, from the click being made on the web front end to Kong proxy the API through, and then the backend service gets a request and send the response back. You can track it end to end and proactively action if any performance bottleneck or if any errors from one single place in the AppDynamics controller outbox. This is very intuitive to use. And I think later on, our engineer will demo it in live. If you switch it on and configure it properly, it actually get all this flow map drawn for you automatically in your Kong, in your AppD controller. This is one of the samples from our using customers. And then the second one is SAML 2. I have mentioned early on, SAML 2 is a fairly mature standard. We haven't supported it because, we mainly focus on job token and OIDC. And now with this new plugin, you could do single sign-on with vendors like Active Directory from Microsoft. The process is fairly simple. When users make the API call, if you have this plugin enabled, user will be redirected to Microsoft Active Directory to do the login using their Microsoft credentials. If the login are successful, a token will be issued, and Kong will validate that token to make sure this is the user and this is authenticated by interpret the assertions in the token itself. And then after that one passed, Kong will pass on the request to the backend services. And also, Kong will store the sessions in a cookie. So when you make the next call, Kong will use the existing session cookies to make the API proxy. So you don't really need to do is to authenticate every single time. This is particularly useful if you would like to still do a SAML-based single sign-on for your API consumers. Next one, we also are going to demo it today, is the OpenAPI Specification validation plugin. We already have a existing plugin which is called request validation, but that one is only be able to do request. This plugin can do both request and response against your OpenAPI specifications. Not only that, this one also supports you to configure a webhook endpoint. So if anything not pass your validations, and you can actually send that request and response body to that webhook for the debugging or root cause analysis later. So our engineer will demo it today. I think I mentioned this one as well, the decryption plugins. This one is to decrypt a token sent in before we can do a job token validation. The encryption and decryption keys can be exchanged using our JKS endpoint. We have enhanced and standardized JKS endpoint with this plugin behind the scene. So actually, we are planning to standardize all this JKS key endpoint across the job signer and the OIDC plugin in the future releases. From functionality perspective, forget about the underlying changes we are doing on the JKS or JWT libraries. The functionality is straightforward. You get an encrypted token coming in, and then this one will decrypt it, so you can actually use it like normal with a JWT validation plugin, as if it's a normal plugin. So it's really straightforward, nothing special. Next one is XML Threat Protection. This one is thanks to a new library is being imported at this time with 3.1. On, as everybody know, is based on Lua. So obviously Lua is not as rich as any other language like Java. So we haven't done XML for quite a long time. It's because the libraries to support XML from Lua is fairly limited. Now this time we can do the XML Threat Protection plugin. It's all thanks to another XML libraries being imported into Kong, which is C-based, obviously. So Lua can call those libraries to do XPath or check the structures, check the depths. So you can limit the tree depths and limit the structures and the payload size. So we could do lots of preventions for you against the bad guys, obviously. So have a look to the documentation and play with it. It is quite powerful, obviously. Next one, I think I mentioned early on as well, the mocking plugin. This plugin, we used to be able to only support probably 1 or 2 sets code samples being returned like to 200 or 201. Not much useful. But with this enhancement, we can now support more or less all the status code being returned with examples. And you can even define by which examples or status code you would like to be returned by this plugin. As well as we can simulate some latencies on your mock services. Say, yeah, I would like to have 500 milliseconds latencies being simulated by this mock. You can also define it now in this mock plugin. So again, very useful plugin to have, especially if you don't have the real API being implemented, but you still would like to test it or share with your developers. So again, welcome you to play it. And if you have any further suggestions for improvement, let us know. I think I talked about plugins quite a lot because 3.1 literally is a plugin-rich release immediately after the version 3 we announced in Summit in September. But also, we have some improvement in Kong Manager as well. If you remember, we probably released consumer groups for quite a long time ago. But consumer group is more or less only supported by DAC and OpenAPI. Nowadays, you can actually using Kong Manager graphically create or assign consumers into a consumer group now. Have a look, it's much easier than before now. And also this Kong Manager version 3.1 is supporting secret management and really show your certificate details in the Kong Manager, as well as some more tooltips being provided for the plugin configurations. If you scroll your mouse through those configurations icons, like question marks or something, they will give you more hint and more suggestions about plugin configurations. That's Kong Manager version 3.1. I think that is very high level of new features and new plugins we released in version 3.1. I think you probably see enough about slides and heard about enough series. Now I think it's a good time to do the live demos so you can see it in action by yourself. I will stop sharing and pass on to one of my engineers, Samuel, to start the demo of the OS validation plugins. Samuel, yeah.
All right.
You can share your screen now.
Thank you, Gang. Just give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Samuele. I am a software engineer in Kong, and today we're going to see some of the features of this new plugin, OAS validation. So this plugin, as Gang anticipated, is meant to validate requests and responses based on an API specification that you can provide in the configuration of the plugin. So this is a very basic example of how to configure the plugin. As usual, you need to pass the plugin name, and then the only required parameter here is, of course, the API specification. This is accepted as a JSON or a YAML file, and it supports both the OAS2 or OAS3 formats. There are a lot of parameters here, but I want to focus on some of these. I think the most interesting that we're going to see in this demo are the ones that begin with validate and then underscore. Basically, the function of these parameters is to enable or disable modularly some of the validation features of the plugin itself. So you can, for example, configure a certain specification and then turn on and off all the different validations of URI params, header, query, or body. So let's see this in action now. As I said a while ago, this is a very basic configuration of the plugin. I'm passing the name. In this example, I'm using the pet store specification, which I'm passing as the API spec parameter. And then I'm setting this verbose response to true. This basically allows to see the reason for the failed validations right in the response body. So this is useful for debugging purposes. So if I configure this plugin, you can see that basically all of the validation properties are set to true by default. And yeah, so this is basically the plugin being set up. Let me just fetch the plugin ID to use later. And we're going to see now what a valid request looks like. So of course, I'm passing now a valid body to the pet endpoint. Like I said, we're using the Swagger pet store. So I'm sending a post request to the pet endpoint, and I'm going to pass a valid body now, just to see that it returns a 200 OK. And I'm doing the same with a GET request by just fetching the pet that we just posted. So we get our gorilla back with the same ID. So we are going to now try to see what happens when the validation fails. So we're going to use the same endpoint, pet123, that, as we saw a while ago, it expects a pet ID to be passed as a required integer parameter here in the path. So if instead of passing a valid integer, I pass any string, for example, this should fail the validation. And in fact, as you can see, I hope you can read it, in the message here, we see a description of this failure. So this validation failed because the type is wrong. It expected an integer and it got a string. But as we saw a while ago, what we can do, for example, with this plugin is to configure all of these different properties to change the way the validation works. So for example, this last request failed its validation because a URI parameter was incorrect. So for example, if we patch the plugin and we set this to false to avoid doing this kind of check, I need, of course, to set the right plugin ID. And now we have the plugin configured without the URI parameter, as you can see here, validation. So if we try the same request again, we see a different response because this time the response is coming from the upstream, and this is basically the Java backend complaining because some string cannot be converted to a long in this case. So let's see something similar. This is a valid request where we are passing, as we saw a while ago, a valid body, but in our specification here, the pet that we're passing in the body has the name as a required parameter. So now we have the body validation enabled. So if we remove the name from here, we would expect this to fail. And in fact, we got a 400 bad request, which explains that the property name is required. We can do something similar to what we just did, disable the request body validation in the same plugin. And the same request is going to pass because this time we don't basically do the body validation. So this is going to the upstream and returning a 200 OK response. Yeah, this is basically all of the main functionalities I wanted to show in this demo for this plugin. As Gang said a while ago, it's also possible to configure all of the validation to report a webhook with the validation result. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sami. I think now it's probably Hans' turn to demo the AppD and SAML 2 plugin. Hans, if you're ready.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
Give me a moment to share my screen. Yep. So let's start with the SAML plugin. So thank you again. My name is Hans. I'm a software engineer with the Kong Gateway team. And I'm going to talk about the SAML plugin, which is a plugin that is used to authenticate web applications that are deployed behind Kong. Web applications means it always requires a browser to be present so that users can go through the IDP login flow. So the basic interaction is the user with the browser goes to Kong Gateway. Kong Gateway realizes that there is no session redirects the user to the IDP. The user goes through the IDP login flow, and once that is completed, they are sent back to the gateway. The gateway evaluates the authentication result and then sends the requests to the web application server. So it's important to understand that SAML is really only useful for web applications that have a browser attached to the user, or whether user uses a browser. Currently, we support Microsoft Azure Active Directory, but in general, the plugin can work with any SAML2 provider, and we will be adding more providers over time as the need arises. The configuration is like standard configuration, where you have to specify the individual parameters of the SAML provider in the config that you are sending to Kong. The required parameters for, sorry for the quick scrolling, for Azure Active Directory are documented on our page. So it is relatively straightforward following this how-to style documentation to get set up with SAML and Azure Active Directory. So basically, what you do is you create the plugin. I've been attaching it to what I call the SAML service here, and it's protecting the SAML path. I have elided the certificate and encryption key data that you have to send when setting up the service. So how this looks like in practice is when I go to my Kong installation to the protected resource, it realizes I have no session and sends me to the to Azure Active Directory. And here I have to choose my account. We are using another IDP which we federate with, but now I have created a session in Azure Active Directory, and Azure is now going to send me back to my application. And this is the response from the application that is that we have configured here in the service. So now what we have here is, of course, a session, and this session is independent of the SAML session that we have with the provider. It's possible to authenticate every request. So if I remove my session here and reload the thing, then I don't need to get through the whole login dance, because Azure already has a session for me, and they just reestablish it with Kong. This is the SAML plugin. Now let's go to AppDynamics. For those of you who don't know, AppDynamics is an application performance management platform. So different parts of an application that is using different servers, front end, back end, send information to AppDynamics, and AppDynamics consolidates that into a common picture of requests that are flowing. So the Kong plugin for AppDynamics contributes to that mechanism and sends information about requests that are going through Kong in the context of a business transaction that is modeled in AppDynamics. The configuration of the AppDynamics plugin is global, because we are using the C++ SDK, which is also mentioned here. The C++ SDK delivered by AppDynamics is a component that we load into the worker process, and that manages the communication between our application and the AppDynamics controller. This makes the installation of the plugin a bit more involved because for one, we cannot deliver the agent SDK with Kong. You need to download it from the AppDynamics site. And then the other circumstance is that configuration of the plugin is going through environment variables. So the Kong environment needs to be changed in order to hook up the AppDynamics account with the agent. This means that in effect, when configuring the plugin, it just needs to be enabled. There are no parameters in the dynamic configuration that we have in Kong. Everything is going through the common environment variables. What I'm going to do to demo this is I'll just run a script that sends a couple of requests to this configured instance of Kong. And then we are going to look at the AppDynamics UI to see the requests that have been flowing. This 409 is because the plugin was already initialized. So one important aspect is to know is that the SDK is buffering the messages that we are sending. So even though we are sending requests through Kong now, and they are also already scheduled to be sent to AppDynamics, in the AppDynamics UI, if I look here, we are not going to see them. We go to 15 minutes. So nothing is shown on the scorecard yet because the messages are still buffered in the SDK. But I'm going to go a bit back further a bit so we see some of the transactions that I've been sending earlier on. So what we do when sending business transactions to AppDynamics is we normally just send business transactions, and only if we detect an error state from the upstream server, like a non-positive, non-2XX response, we report that as an error. So for example, I have one error here. That is a 404 error. Let me see, does not exist, sorry. So the upstream server has returned a 404, and now in AppDynamics we can see this 404 error. And then we also monitor execution response time of the upstream server. So if the upstream server is responding very slowly, like in the minutes, then we report that also. This is basically what I can show for this plugin. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Hans. So I think we back to the Q&A session. Let me read out the questions currently we got in the Q&A. The first question is from Jim. What is the gateway overhead, scale, and performance with the OS spec validation plugin? Jim, to be honest, I don't have the latest figures about the latency added or memory used or whatsoever. But based on my understanding, this is a native Lua plugin. They haven't got much overhead or added too much latency. But obviously, we probably will test it out and get some feelings. However, this is purely based on how big your JSON payload is and how complex it is. So I can only say it's probably as normal or fairly low, but I can't really give you exact figure. The second one is, does the mock plugin, it's also from Jim, does the mock plugin return dynamic response based on the request body? This one, I don't think so, because in the mock plugin, we do not implement the API logic in it. So the request shouldn't make any difference, especially request payload shouldn't make any difference to the response examples you returned. The key is actually the paths coming in to this API mock, and also the headers. Let me share my screen, probably that will make more sense. So if I share my screen, let me share my screen. Yeah, if you can see my screen here, we actually do is we're actually sending a header, say xcon mock status code header. So when we ping a endpoint of the API, at the same time, we will give you a parameters in the header. Say, yeah, return me the 500 examples. Then they actually return the examples you write in your definitions of OpenAPI specs. And similarly, we can actually give you an example ID. For example, here, you can have two values to return either Hao or Sasha, but you can actually define this in a header. So the particular example will be returned. So I think it's based on two things. One thing is the header value you send in. The other thing is obviously the URL you use in your mock plugin. So the request body is not the determined factor. So hopefully that addresses your question, Jim. Yeah, the SAML one from John Williams. Why we pass it through the Kong gateway? In the examples you listed out here, is a user already being authenticated and then has a SAML token header. So if that user is going to make an API call to Kong, obviously Kong need to be able to do is to open up that SAML token and be able to interpret it to say, yeah, whether this user is actually the user they claim to be, or actually this token is issued by the IDPs Kong is fasting. So I think even the scenarios you mentioned here will actually need the SAML2 token to be in place. Otherwise, Kong will not understand your SAML token. And the Hans demo thing is the SP initiated SAML2 authentication flow. So which it literally means Kong will be the first hit point. At that time, customer hasn't got a SAML token in the request header. Then customer will be directed by Kong to do the authentication. What you mentioned is actually the IDP initiated authentication flow. So both need the SAML2 token to be in place for Kong to be able to interpret and validate the SAML2 token is indeed a valid token and the user is a valid user to be authenticated. So for both, I think Kong need this plugin to be able to understand SAML2 token. Hopefully that addresses your question, John. Next one is the AppD. What kind of performance impact can we expect? That's from Akshay. Can we expect if enabled for large numbers of root? I think for the AppDynamics plugin, the performance impact is fairly minimal. The reason for that is because we're actually using the native C++ SDK provided by AppD. So Kong plugin is actually talking to the AppD native C++ SDK agent. And that agent is not going to synchronously send the information to AppD controller, but they will buffer it up. And you can actually configure an interval, say how often that SDK is going to send those informations to controller. So from Kong to that SDK locally, it's asynchronous and more or less like stately synchronous call. But when this SDK send up the transactions, they actually send it asynchronously in batch. So with this architecture in place, the performance is, nearly none impact. We actually tested with a very big bank. It's probably added about, sometimes 7 milliseconds or 20 milliseconds or 40 milliseconds. I think. So it's minimal impact. Next one is from Shashank. If I pronounce wrong your name, sorry about that. If the response validation is turned on in OAS validation plugin, what HTTP status code and error message is returned by Kong in case of error? This one, I think, I can't really.
It's 406, not acceptable. I just finished testing a second ago, so yeah.
Okay,
I was
excellent.
going to answer. Yeah.
Okay, Sammy, thank you much. Yeah, I'm about to take it away. I think. Yeah, I don't really know, to be honest. Okay, next question. Oh yeah, we don't have any open questions, I guess. We answered all of them.
Yep, I think one of our participants wants to ask a question, so I just permitted Zhao to ask a question. So Zhao, please go ahead. You should be able to talk now. You can unmute yourself and ask. Nope. Okay.
I think Joe, you're still muted, I think.
Yeah.
We can't hear you.
Sorry, it was by mistake.
Okay, no worries.
No worries.
Sorry for that.
No worries. Cool. Well, I think that was all of the questions. Thank you so much, Gang, Sam, Hans. You guys were awesome. Thank you very much. That was our last user call for 2022. And yeah, I want to wish all of you the great rest of the year. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year if you're celebrating. And we hope to see you in 2023 for all of our next events. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.